All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of Storyboard. I'm Heather Warburton. I'm an artist from New Jersey. And let me introduce you or turn it over to my co host so he can introduce himself.
And I'm Blake Spencer, and living in Texas. I'm retired from many years of ministry. I'm no longer a minister, but I'm a writer and I'm a children's book lover, and I'm Heather's friend.
Yeah, we've been friends for a couple years now. And the concept kind of for this show came out of, well, first off, Blake wrote a really excellent children's book and gave me the option to illustrate it for him. So that's kind of how we started our teaming up process for things like this. And the concept kind of came out of that for this show, where he's going to be reading classic children's literature to you. Well, I illustrate it live as he's reading it. And since we don't have, this is usually the point in the show where I'd be showing you the completed render of whatever I drew the previous week, but this is our first episode. So I don't have one of those yet. So that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about the show. But it should be fun. I think that it's going to be good for kids and adults, art lovers, literature lovers, and people who just like a nice man from Texas reading you a story.
I'm nice most days. And by the way, our book is The Beautiful Little Bunny and the Crusty Old Turtle by Blake Spencer and Heather Warburton, available on Amazon.
Yeah, and you can get it on in digital form. You can get a physical copy of it if you like to hold on to a book. It's also available here if you're local to New Jersey in the Riverfront Renaissance Art Gallery and soon to be in the toy store in Hamilton. And I believe it's also in some places in Texas, right?
It is. It's at the Heritage Museum in Montgomery County, and a beautiful little bookstore in the Woodlands, and the back of my trunk of my car.
All right, so are you about ready to are you ready? If you're
I'm
warmed up with
ready.
your reading voice there,
I am
I'm gonna
ready.
start sharing my screen here of where I'm gonna be doing the artwork.
Today we chose a story that some of us might remember. It matters how old you are, but it's one of those stories I think um, all ages need to hear, and a beautiful, beautiful story about being loved and being real. And are we ready, Heather?
Yep, we are ready. Do you see I've started drawing now?
Okay. The title of the story is The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. There once was a velveteen rabbit, and in the beginning, he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in that stocking: nuts and oranges and a toy engine and chocolate almonds and a clockwork mouse. But the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours, the boy loved him. And then aunts and uncles came to dinner. And there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels and the excitement of looking at all the new presents. The Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time, he lived in the top cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost some of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust, like himself. And he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion who was made by the disabled soldiers who should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with the government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace. And the only person who was kind to him at all was the skin horse. The skin horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath. And most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string braid necklaces. He was a wise He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boost and swagger and by break their main springs and pass away. And he knew they were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful. And only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the skin horse, understood all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick out handle?" "Real isn't how you're made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with you, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. "I suppose you are real," said the rabbit. And then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive, but the skin horse only smiled. The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real become happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like. And yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away into cupboards. She called this tidying up, and the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind so much, for whatever he was thrown, wherever he was thrown, he came down soft. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime. So she simply looked about, and seeing that toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you." And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him in the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first, he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery when all the house was silent, and his talks with the skin horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like the burrows the real rabbits lived in. And they had splendid games together in whispers when Nana had gone away to her supper and left the nightlight burning on the mantelpiece. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close around him all night long. And so time went on. And the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail becoming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow and picnics on the grass and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk. And Nana had to come and look for him with the candle because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed off with the corner rubbed him off with the corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed, stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that he was so happy, for he knew that what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said so. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot button eyes that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it the next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare, if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived, there was a wood, and in that long June evening, the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken where he would be quite cozy. For he was a kind hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and from between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up, but he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Oh," said the furry rabbit, it's an easy as anything," and he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can," he said. "I can," said Little Rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." Well, he meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece like a pin cushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits had very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs." And he began to laugh. I have, cried the little rabbit. I've got hind legs. I'm sitting on them. Then stretch them out and show. Show me like this, said the wild rabbit. And he began to whirl around and dance till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. I don't like dancing, he said. I'd rather sit still. But all the while he was longing to dance. For a funny new tickling feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the velveteen rabbit's ear. And then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped back. He doesn't smell right, he exclaimed. He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real. I am real, said the little rabbit. I am real. The boy said so. And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. Come, come back and play with me, called the little rabbit. Oh, do come back. I know I am real. But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and from, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. Oh dear, he thought. Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me? For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping they would come back. But they never returned. And presently the sun sank lower, and the little white moths fluttered about, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all the whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful. And that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then, one day, the boy was ill. And we're going to end the story right there this time. And our next episode, we'll pick up the story right at that spot to find out what happens to the boy and what happens to the Velveteen Rabbit.
All right. So this is what I got done in the time you were reading here.
Wow. I couldn't look because I was so focused on my words. I saw out of the corner of my eyes. That's cool.
So I was illustrating, the scene where the real rabbit came to meet the little Velveteen Rabbit.
Uh-huh.
I got most of it done, but next week I'll have the fully finished render of it for everyone to see. And let's see, did we get any comments? No, it doesn't look like we got any comments yet while we were doing that. But for people who are curious about the art segment of it, I was just using Photoshop, mostly the Kyle expansion brushes for Photoshop. And, you kind of break things down and the shapes that you're looking for. I'm not usually this quick. I'm not a usually quick artist, but I knew I only had about 15 minutes to go today to try to get something down here. So this is my first attempt at fast art of sorts.
Past art. I've learned a little bit about watercolor painting, and I've learned that clouds are the hardest things to create. So I wasn't able to watch you make the clouds. Can you talk about the clouds?
Sure, that's actually just one of the Kyle brushes, is that it's sort of a cloud shape. I just filled in, I kind of flatted in the sky background with that bluish color. And then on another layer on top of that, you use a sort of a white, this cloud creation brush, which kind of creates like it does is opacity changes during the course of while you're using it. So it sort of jitters the very dark white and the very lighter white together as you're using the brush.
And so what was
And
that
I
word?
hmm?
You said you used a big word at the beginning of that.
Opacity?
Yeah, what's that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. The opacity is sort of how deep the color is. That you can have something that's kind of just a little bit pink, and that's a
Oh,
lower opacity, or just a little bit white, and
okay.
that's a lower opacity. Whereas a very strong, deep color, like these
Mm,
trees are very brown, so they have a very high opacity.
I got you.
But some of the grass that I put down has a much lower opacity because it's just a little bit green.
Is it related to the word opaque?
Yes, it
Like
is.
that's the word. Okay, gotcha. That's cool. Well, I wanted to also mention as we read this story, it's an old story, and I assume it's from kind of England, and they use words instead of saying the woods, they say the wood, and bracken, which is I didn't look up what bracken is. But it's out in the
I think
woods.
it's like briars and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, just kind of the underbrush that grows in the woods, and I think when we both read the story, we got caught up on what the skin horse was. We went,
Yeah,
"Dude,
that's
what's
really an
that?"
archaic term, isn't it?
That kind of, what's a skin horse? But really, all it was a leather. It was a horse, a stuffed horse made out of leather, like a leathery horse, and he had
Yeah, I
lost.
guess a long time ago they didn't have a lot of the modern materials that we have, the fluffy stuff that we put in stuffed animals now, so they actually made it out of leather.
Yeah, and then we learned sawdust. Hmm. Did you have a stuffed animal that you loved?
I did. I'm sort of aging myself here, telling my age, but I had a pound puppy that I really loved.
Did you love the eyeballs off of it?
No, I still have the pound puppy, and it still sits on my bedside table, like, there so it can watch over me while I sleep still in my, late 40s.
Wow. I had, and then I'm dating myself too. Um, I had two, and one was a stuffed Mr. Magoo. Isn't that a strange one? Do you know who Mr.
Yeah,
Magoo
I
is?
do.
What a strange stuffed animal or person or cartoon to have. And I literally loved that, and I literally kind of chewed the end of his rubber nose off because I just would sit there and but I loved him. He was my friend. That's why
Yeah,
I
and,
love
like,
this
thinking of
story.
things from I loved this story when I was little. It was one of my favorite stories, so it's awesome to still be able to, find some relevance in it, even though it's way far older than I am. I think it was written probably in, like, the 20s or 30s for it to, be the age that it is, and I loved it when I was a kid, and I still love some of the messages about what makes something real and what makes something we all have value in different ways. and different things that make us special and unique. And I think that's a great one of the great stories of this book.
Well, um, I remember the story as well, and it means more to me now as I've learned who I am. But I'm also in this moment where I've moved back into this house where I grew up to be with my mother to help her when in her older age. She's 87, and so I think of her as this real person. But uh, all of us kind of begin looking different as we get older, and I like the idea that a lot of it a lot of what we look like and a lot of what happens to us is because we've been loved and we have loved.
Right. You start to show the signs of a life well lived.
Yeah, so
You've had
I,
experiences, you've had things that have scarred us and that we've healed from and grown stronger. All of those things are been out there living a life, and now you're showing signs, and every wrinkle is well earned, and every gray
right.
hair, I'm starting to get more than a few of them. I've earned those gray hairs.
Well, and then the other, I sat with my daughter yesterday out on the deck, and she's older now, an adult, but she has a 5 year old. But we talked about, do you, do you spend a lot of, I knew the answer to this because both of us spend a lot of time thinking about who we are and what it means to be real, what it means to be us in a unique way, and what it means to go, hey, I'm really okay with myself no matter what other people think. And I think that's the biggest part of this story for me is I can't spend a whole lot of time caring about what other people think when I'm really proud of where I've come and what I've become. So it's a beautiful story.
So we're going to be back in 2 weeks, about the same time. We'll be again on YouTube, on Twitch, and on Facebook. And you can follow us and see what happens to the little boy and what happens to the Velveteen Rabbit in the second half of the story. And we're going to have more great stories coming up in the weeks to follow. And I'll hopefully get faster and faster at illustrating things as we go so I can get more and more of the story that we capture. And I think that's important too for a takeaway message before we close it out for today is when you ever hear somebody reading you a story, like Blake reading this story to us today, and you kind of create pictures in your head of what you think is happening, that's kind of all art is. That's the first step of creating art is visualizing. So you already are an artist. There's no barrier of you've got to go to this amount of art school or take this amount of courses. You're already an artist in your mind, and you're all you have to do is get your body to catch up to the fact that you're an artist, get your hands to understand how you want to draw the lines, and that'll come. But you're already creating art every time you think about something or visualize the world, visualize your family. You're making pictures in your head, and that's really important, and that's about how you create new and beautiful things in the world.
That's awesome. You bring the words alive with a picture. And I think someone else drawing the picture, they see a different part of it. And it's really fun to see what part of the story you see and bring alive.
Yeah, we're all unique. We all have different experiences and backgrounds and things that we latch on to or we're drawn to. So that's why it's important that everyone is an artist and everyone shares that art that they're creating in their minds.
So I'm going to keep writing and reading, and Heather's going to keep bringing it alive.
Yeah, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Hopefully, you enjoyed this. If you do, remember to like and share us on wherever you found us. Like us, follow us, share us, and you can check out other stuff we've been doing. On the website, you can check out some other artwork I've done. You can, and I'll mention it again one more time. Buy that book if you like. It's a great story. Easter's coming up, right? So a little story about a bunny, might be something that you want
The
to
beautiful
share with
little
your
bunny
family.
and the crusty old turtle.
And a crusty old turtle. And maybe someday we'll read that story here to everyone too.
Yay!
Thank you so much for joining us. We've really enjoyed spending some time with you today.
Bye.